Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Think Global Forum Roundtable. This is the third episode in our series, which is covering the wonderful world of AI, content, and localization. This one is going to be extra special. We're joined by Arle Lommel. I get each of the panel to introduce themselves in a moment. But the topic we're going to be talking about today is about how will AI transform the work of language professionals. And I'm sure we'll get on to other AI exciting topics. So I'm going to hand over to each panel member here, maybe get each person to introduce themselves. So maybe Alison, can we start with you?
Hello, great to be here and welcome everyone who's joined us today. As was said, Alison Alexander. I am the co-founder of Metacampus. Metacampus is a Web3 startup dedicated to helping people transition into this new digital world that we are all operating in.
Thank you, Alison. Julio, maybe yourself.
Sure, thank you. Hey everyone, my name is Julio Leal. I'm right now leading the localization program at Spendesk, French fintech unicorn. I'm really excited to be here to share, what's transforming the industry right now around AI. So I'm sure that the audience will be thrilled to hear today's thoughts.
Thank you. Patrick?
Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Nunes. I'm a director of global communications and design at Rotary International. I'm originally from Brazil, based in Chicago, and excited to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Patrick. And by no means, last but by no means least, Arle Lommel. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Arle.
Yeah, I'm a senior analyst at the market research firm CSA Research. Prior to joining CSA Research, I'd been at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, working on machine translation projects, and have been involved with localization and so forth since 1998.
So we're in great hands. We have a great panel here today. We will be taking some questions towards the end of proceedings today. So if you're familiar with the platform that we're on, you can just quite easily go to the Q&A section, drop in a question, and of course you can chat away too. But do put in your put in your questions to the Q&A as we go through proceedings, because we will be putting questions to the panel at the end. So let's get things started. Arle, you're going to do a presentation on this topic, and we're going to really get into it. And then the panel will come back in then and give some initial thoughts and get into this conversation a little bit more. But Arle, let's hand it over to you to share the presentation today for our audience.
All right. So hello, and thank you to Simon and the crew at the Think Global Forum for the opportunity to speak to you. I already told you a bit about myself. Just say that CSA Research is a market research firm that focuses on bringing the discipline of market research to the global language sector. And today I'm going to be drawing on a variety of sources that come from our research to help show how AI is affecting the language technology sector. In my discussion today, I'm going to start by introducing a concept that we call post-localization. It's an important context for this, and then I'll shift to talking about the changing face of language work with examples of specific changes that are enabled by artificial intelligence, and then I'll have a brief conclusion. Now, before diving into that, I'd like to start with a premise that language professionals, that is translators, interpreters, localization engineers, and others, are really the canary in the coal mine for how artificial intelligence will affect workers more generally. Why do I say this? Well, first off, the machine translation era began in 1947, and machine translation has always been at the heart of AI. The Georgetown MT project started then. Well, actually some memos started, and then Georgetown started a few years later. And MT researchers initially conceived of machine translation as a decryption exercise. If you had a source text, you could apply rules to decode it into a target language. And these efforts appear simple by today's standards, but they show that this root of AI in machine translation and language technology goes way, way back. The commercial language sector began experiencing really significant disruption from AI already in the mid-2000s, when advances in AI and computing power enabled data-driven approaches to succeed. This took development time for MT away where it had been taken years to build a system, down to weeks and then to days, and suddenly AI-driven solutions brought costs down by orders of magnitude, even as the apparent quality of the output increased dramatically. And many translators feared that MT would mark the end of their work, but the industry still exists, and it's still largely dominated by human processes. So this gives us a sense of where AI may be going and how it will affect other fields. But the pace of disruption, of course, is accelerating. Furthermore, the current wave of generative AI applications, think things such as ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, and others, actually emerged from transformer technologies that were designed initially for machine translation that grew out of work done at Google to improve MT. And of course, you'll say, well, generative AI is broader than MT, and you're right. But if you've used neural MT at any point since 2015, you've already been using generative AI long before that became a household term. And it's important to remember that MT really is a type of generative AI, not something distinct from it. And so with that, let's now turn to how AI is likely to affect the work for language professionals. To understand the ways that the work of professionals will change, I need to introduce a concept we call post-localization. The notion behind post-localization is that until now, the growth of the industry, the language industry, has been driven largely by written human translation services. That's shown in green in this graph, plus an increasing amount of MT editing services shown in teal, augmented translation, which I'll come back to momentarily, in blue, and then more or less floating separately interpreting services shown in orange. This is what we call the localization era. But in 2023, we found that industry revenues from these services had actually started to decline, leading us to state that 2023 represents peak localization. Now, before coming on to what post-localization means, I want to show you a diagrammatic representation of augmented translation. I don't have time to go into this, but what's significant is that in this view, language professionals are at the center, and they utilize and interact with and connect with a set of AI-driven technologies shown as lozenges around the perimeter of this image. And they do this to deliver content effectively and efficiently to their customers and to people around the world. Now, obviously, I don't have time to go into all of this, but the goal of all this is to make a seamless experience where the human is in charge, but the technologies are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Now, on the basis of this more integrated approach, we predict that 2023 is the start of the post-localization era, in which services will be driven by humans at the core with pervasive AI and natural language processing. Rather than serving as bolt-on additions, which is how these things have been treated so far, AI services will become omnipresent and serve to aid the language worker. One consequence is that written language services will quickly blend together with blurred boundaries, and spoken language services will follow a little later until customers will expect all language services to be available in any medium, on any device, and at any time, with humans and machines contributing to them. Now, many of the changes I'll be discussing come from this shift towards post-localization. So now let's look at some of the ways work is already changing for language professionals in this context. The first area is enabled by improved machine translation. In 2021, I introduced the term responsive machine translation. I don't have time to go through this entire chart, but what's interesting is the box in red that refers to MT that's able to adapt dynamically to the context in which it occurs. Crucially, engines in this approach are what we call polymorphic engines, ones that take on different forms depending on where and how they're used. Think of engines that can select appropriate terminology based on an analysis of text, seamlessly switching from marketing to legal and technical, all within a single document as needed. They'll no longer be limited to one content type per document, and they'll deliver intelligent translation. Now, to some extent, generative AI tools, large language models, are already creating this, but they're not all the way there. LLMs do a great job of allowing prompts to specify context and constrain output. But in other ways, Neural MT, which has been around for a few years, is actually the best prepared to deliver on this. And we're already seeing the first commercial systems that are enabling some of this. Now, the fundamental question that this raises when we see this dramatically improving AI-driven translation is how this is going to affect language professionals and their livelihoods. We know that it's having an effect. On screen, you see a chart where we tracked whether demand for services are going up or down based on surveys of LSPs. And what we found is that in the post-pandemic period rebound, there was substantial increases in demand for both human translation services shown in red and machine-driven services shown in blue. But as time has gone on, this has actually slipped to now where we're seeing decreasing demand for translation and localization. And our latest surveys, which I don't have here, show that this is only continuing. So these pure human services that have driven this industry are going into decline and being replaced by something that has AI as a component. Now, the second area I want to address is a new technology approach called quality estimation. This is really about a decade old, but it's been making rapid strides recently. Quality estimation refers to technologies that are able to analyze texts and their translations to determine whether they're likely to meet stakeholder requirements. Think of that as a proxy for quality. This is an automated approach to risk management as well. You use an algorithm to examine text and determine whether it's likely to cause a problem or not, and focus the efforts of humans. Now, the ideal approach to this is one that I first termed the good, the bad, and the ugly in 2013. In this approach, quality estimation software examines human or machine output and assigns it to one of three categories. In this view, the good refers to content that meets requirements, and so you don't need someone to touch it. The bad refers to content that can be fixed, but where MT offers some advantage over just having a human do it, and it's more efficient to edit it rather than translate it from scratch. In this context, you'll want to use augmented translation to show the translator what needs to be done with the MT suggestion and potentially identify the portion or portions that are likely to need work. The ugly then refers to any content where it would take longer to repair the MT than to translate from scratch, or where potential errors pose a significant risk to end users or other stakeholders. Basically, this is any content where human translation is required and where MT would only decrease efficiency. So the primary goal of this is to identify the ugly consistently and reliably so that language professionals can target those portions without the cognitive load of having to review each segment, determine whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And here the idea is that technology should get out of the way and enable the human to do their job. The second most important goal is to identify the good so that the linguist can ignore it or just do a quick check rather than a careful edit. And of course, if you can identify those two extremes, the bad is what's left in the middle, and the language professional then knows where to edit. So it makes them much more efficiently. Now, with this in place, translators should be paid on the basis of how much they do of each kind of content. For example, ugly content should be paid at a higher rate than bad content, and bad content should be paid at a different rate than good content. And so this allows targeting and payment that's commensurate with effort. Now, contrast this with today's work where everything's just paid a flat rate that's discounted regardless of whether machine translation is helpful or not. And so you end up situations where MT actually makes it worse, and then the translator suffers because they're not getting paid for their effort. But if you know that 25% of the content is ugly, 55% is bad, and 20% is good, you start charging accordingly, and you get something that is fairer to everyone. Now, all this sounds great, and CSA Research has seen this as key to the future of augmented translation and AI use in this sector for several years now, but the reality is that this is still developing. It's not quite ready yet, but we're seeing significant improvements, and it's going to be central. So if you're a translator or work with language services, expect to start seeing this in a tool near you soon. Now, the third area I wanted to identify is pervasive prompt engineering. We expect that language professionals will need to become experts in using prompts in generative AI to automate tasks. A lot of people may say, well, I don't want to deal with it, but we see this as key. So let's start with an example of the sort of task that language professionals might hate. Suppose you have a translation into a language that makes a grammatical distinction between formal and informal, such as German. But the translation ends up using a different formality than what you expect. Correcting this is the sort of task that language professionals hate doing, and which often they're not really paid to do because they're seen as fixing a mistake. So this is a dead cost and something everybody wants to get away from. However, this is something, as you can see on screen, where generative AI can easily correct with a simple prompt. There I told it, hey, rewrite this in informal. And this saves time and effort. Now, this is one simple example, but you can use prompts to rewrite text, shorten it, simplify it, change the reading level or audience, or do all these sorts of things that used to require extensive human effort for little reward, and things that were often done because clients would demand changes after translation was done. So here, AI has a significant potential to remove tasks that translators don't like to do and let them focus on where they have skills. And when you think about it, translators and interpreters are ideal as prompt engineers because they're trained to think critically about language and how it works. These tasks will only become more important as generative AI moves into language professionals' tools and as workers grow more accustomed to the strengths and weaknesses of large language models. And we're already seeing this developing in tools that have prompt capabilities and build in hooks to generative AI. Right now, we're still learning how to use these tools, but this is something that should be exciting to individuals working in the field. You have the chance to define the future and how it will work. Think of it as we're in the gold rush phase. What do I mean by this? It means that we're still at a point where a lot of fundamental discoveries remain. Everyone can make a contribution and barriers to entry are low. Language professionals today are the pioneers who will determine what's going to happen in decades going forward. This is a time of tremendous opportunity. You in the audience may be the ones who figure out how to do new and amazing things that no one else has thought of. You may be the ones to discover things that save thousands of dollars or that can make you and others incredibly efficient. Now, due to time constraints, I can't go into depth for everything that I would like to discuss, but I'm going to toss in a few bonus items for discussion, and maybe some of this will come up in the Q&A. The first of these things is automated content enrichment. This is something I've been talking about for years, but is finally becoming real. This is technology that uses AI to add links, resources, and additional information to content, such as dictionary entries, product information, pages, content repositories, and images, all without you having to ask or break your workflow to get them. As automated content enrichment becomes more common, language professionals will be more efficient and better able to focus on tasks more effectively. The second item we're going to see is automated post-editing. This is an area where you use generative AI, large language models, to correct the output from MT. This is still developing. It shows great promise. There is the problem right now that if the MT isn't reasonably good, the LLMs actually make it worse. But when combined with quality estimation that I've discussed, this will reduce the need for linguists to correct trivial mistakes in MT and should again help them focus on areas that actually require their skills and knowledge. The third use of generative AI is to create content directly in language. Here, language professionals will not need to be translating, but will instead be evaluating and guiding machines to produce content specific to markets and needs. Because AI hallucinates and has other problems, linguist cultural knowledge will be vital in improving output. Finally, I should mention that Gen AI can help with research. Several years back, I remember working on a terminology project for a day that I needed to do for something. And now with generative AI, it would have taken me 5 minutes. This is something where if you're using it for research, it can make you more efficient. So now let's wrap up this discussion with some closing thoughts and advice as far as I'm qualified to give advice. Before I dive into that, I'd like to point out that the magic of generative AI is not evenly spread. The chart on screen shows the portion of data by language group in Common Crawl, which is widely used source for training these tools. Almost half of it's concentrated in English, and including English, 85% of it's in European languages. This means there's a lot of work to be done by language professionals before the rest of the world can use generative AI. And I should point out that that 5.4% that's in the three smallest slices comprises 106 languages and 3 billion people. And there's an additional 1.7 billion people who speak languages that aren't present at all in the training data. So over half of the world does not have access to this today. This image shows just how oversized some languages are. The little gray guys on the left represent what it would be if every language were represented equally to its population, but we can see that English is a huge giant compared to some of the others, and it's dominated by US English. This means that generative AI today is an American-centric world, leaving lots of room for linguists to start making difference in creating the data that will enable others to use this. Now, the elephant in the room question I haven't yet touched is whether language professionals will even be needed going forward. I've talked as if they will, but this is an open question. Will generative AI become so good that linguists should just surrender now to their new robotic overlords? Will they be relegated to the role of AI janitors, tidying up after the messes left by AI hallucinations? Or will they be enabled and augmented to do new things? Put another way, will AI replace humans or will it augment them? This is a difficult question to answer because AI will replace some tasks and some humans in some tasks. Several years ago, I was quoted as saying that the only humans who would be replaced by machine translation are those who translate like machines. That quote was converted into a meme that circulated somewhat widely in translation circles, and I still think it's true. Those humans that bring something beyond slavishly porting words from one language to another will be able to thrive alongside AI and utilize it. In fact, they're going to gain from it. They'll be augmented. But what do they need to do to succeed? There are three things you can do to thrive in an AI-enhanced world. First, gain experience. Learn how to use AI for various tasks. Experiment with it. Work on implementing it. Second, specialize. Generalists will be the easiest people to replace. But if you're a language worker, find something you can contribute, some field of knowledge or skill that isn't common. You'll then be positioned to thrive and use AI with confidence to aid you. And third, articulate a value beyond I translate. Language professionals do far more than translate. They bridge cultural divides, they enable market entry, they improve lives, they solve problems. These are things that AI can't do alone. So demonstrate your value in terms of what actually matters to others. Yes, translation is part of it, but it's not the whole. And if the world thinks all you do is port words, then you'll be replaced by machines that port words. But if you do more, you'll succeed. And finally, in closing, I'd say that the biggest caution I can give is that, like it or not, AI is not going away. Ignoring it will lead to bigger risks for you. Linguists and others need to learn to work with it and can find advantages. But those that don't do so will find themselves relegated to ever-shrinking niches and islands of work. And with that, thank you. I hope this has been useful for you and given you things to talk about. And if you have any questions that we don't end up covering in the panel discussion today, feel free to email me or find me on LinkedIn. I'll say one advantage of having an unusual name like mine is that I can't hide. I'm easy to find. And with that, thank you.
Oh, that was a wonderful presentation. I don't know how you covered as many topics as you did. We went from Google, Neural MT, augmented translation, the route to responsive machine translation, the MT, how responsive MT affects localization professionals. You talked about the rapidly evolving quality estimations and how that's improving rapidly. Love the good, the bad, and the ugly. Always good to see that. And also, you know, the primary goal to reliably identify the ugly. I thought that was very insightful. I'm sure we'll debate a little bit as well. Translators paid at the rate subject to the type of content, the good, the bad, or the ugly type content, compared to how it is today. We talked about, prompt engineering and the importance of that. I'm sure Alison can weigh in on that, and so much more that you covered there, and particularly interested in the unevenness of AI and how we had the large American scale and European languages, and then the rest of the world, half the population, billions of people, not really covered by it. So I thought that was really, really insightful and interesting. And we're getting some questions in from the audience already. I just want to remind people, put your questions in on any of the topics that come up today. We'll try and answer as many as we can as we get to the end. But let me bring back in our panel now. Let me maybe start with Patrick. Any initial observations? Then we'll come on to you, Julio and Alison.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Arle. That's amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing those. It's definitely a lot of information, very well packed and shared. Yeah. So initial thoughts is definitely it's the train has left the station, right? We cannot ignore that, as you mentioned, and not being part of the conversation from a how can I be part of this perspective is very dangerous. And unfortunately, I still see some of that. I think you pose a very interesting question there with the replacement aspect of things, because that's the first thing that has come to mind. And as you mentioned, AI has been part of our environment for forever, right? We've been having these conversations forever, and finally, I'm seeing that shift from the perspective of, is it going to replace or not, to how can I be part of this and move forward? Not everywhere, unfortunately. Some people are still stuck in that mindset of thinking about the replacement aspect of it instead of getting ahead of the game. As you well mentioned, there's a lot there to be discovered and uncovered in terms of how it evolves, because it's still very American-centric, as you mentioned. So my initial thoughts here are definitely about how can we all be part of this from every angle. I believe I've always believed in the transformation of the evolution of roles as it is, and the linguists are no different. And regardless of AI, and AI, I think just hopefully helps a lot of people jump on that thought process that we have to continue evolving.
Thank you, Patrick. Alison, could I ask you maybe just for some initial thoughts?
Sure, thank you. Great presentation. And I take away a few things. Firstly, I love the historic view, just to kind of give that, and I think that's relevant for lots of people, both if you're in a business, you might be sitting there thinking, how is it coming? When is it coming? And it's regardless of the business. And you can just see that evolution. I think if you're a professional, and again, I know we're talking about language professionals, but any professional can start to see, oh, I can see the shift, I can see those jumps that it's making, I can start to predict where that's going to go in my role. And I think it's really helpful. I like it for the I'm going to say the strategists and the policymakers. I really hope that they're looking at it to go, it's like always, we put our head in the sand. Yeah, it's not coming. But actually, again, you're showing that, and it's a really good visualization of how do we prepare Gen A for that. And this is where it's going, which leads to just a couple of other points around the bias, which I think I really love the fact, your imagery, and I was like, I'm going to ask for those slides, because I think we talk about that a lot, and people push away AI because they say it's really biased, it's really biased, it's really biased. And I know that, and we know it is, and you just demonstrated it is. But actually, the more we show that, the more we give the challenge to ourselves as developers or people working in this field to actually shift that balance. Yeah, how do we do that? And I think that's a really interesting challenge to everybody. And I think your last point about, like, don't put your head in the sand, this is coming. I think that's a really important bit. And I love the bit of skill yourself up, get specialist, and then be able to sell that. And I think that comes all the way back to my point of the reason educationists need to hear this, because that's, for me, the flaw. If we're not educating children how to use this. Yes, we all assume they're internet natives because they know how to do it. But are we really teaching them to understand and use this technology in the ways that will enhance their lives and enhance their careers and help us grow as a society? So I think all of those points, a bit of a ramble there.
No, but all great points. And I think you're right. I mean, Al nailed it. The big risk is ignoring AI. And it's here. It's not coming, it's here, and it is impacting everybody. Julio, initial thoughts, my friend.
Yep. Thank you, Arle, for the presentation. Amazing slides and amazing information. Actually, many of the ideas you share resonated with many of the things that are happening right now. We all know that AI has basically accelerated many of the things that we were seeing from machine translation. And, in a couple of months, we've seen tremendous changes in how we operate and how we do things internally. I really love your analogy about the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that's something that I actually have to be dealing with that every day right now. And it's clear that many teams that in the past were not considering translation are now doing it, just because it's an easy way of covering a lot of content that in the past was not even considered. So that's a huge advancement for companies. Another idea that you shared and that I totally agree is that AI is here to stay, and we should not, as language professionals, should not be looking at this technology as an enemy. I think that they should look at AI as an opportunity to create a better version of themselves. And this is actually what I'm experiencing right now with some of the translators that I'm working on at Spendesk. And it's just that tasks that maybe 2-3 years ago used to take 8 hours are now taking half of the time. So by doing that, we are just becoming more efficient. You are adding more value to the company because we are able to go to market faster. We are able to provide added value to the entire supply chain. So that's something being perceived across the company. And now translation is something that companies are embracing more and more. So, many of the things that you touched today on the presentation are already happening. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what's ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Julio. Arle, you're more than welcome to come back in on any of the points that have been made here, but I do also want to drop in, if I can, just coming back to the title of what we're talking about today and how it impacts those language professionals. You were talking about stakeholder quality and how it's our ability to measure the quality and hit the stakeholder expectations in terms of what type of work is required. And I'm interested in that because a couple of questions that are coming in, and we will get to the Q&A in a little while. But there's a trend here, which is, well, I know about Gen AI, I've heard about ChatGPT, and I know a little bit about MT, but what skills do I actually need to learn? How do I transition myself as a language professional or a translator to make, best use of these tools? How do I augment myself, if you like? So maybe if I could also throw that in all.
Yeah, now this is a very complex question, and it's complicated right now because so much is up in the air. I use that gold rush analogy that I've had people contacting me a lot lately saying, where do I get educated in this? And the problem is the education system necessarily lags this. So I can't say, go to, Monterey in the US or University of Sheffield in the UK or something and learn about it there. It's really, you almost have to be bootstrapping this because it means going out, gaining experience. And actually, one of the best resources I found for someone who wants to be educated is look what people are posting on LinkedIn. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge sharing there about prompts and different things. And it surprised me, but if you watch there, you can find a lot of information. The other thing that's encouraging is there's a whole lot that's being published on arXiv and other sources that's open. where previously you would have had to need journal subscriptions. But now as an individual worker or whatever, you can go and read the same research that others are citing. And some of it will sound like gobbledygook, but there's a lot of it that's accessible to someone who doesn't have a degree in machine learning.
Yeah, Alison, be very interested on your thoughts on this. Yeah.
I mean, well, firstly, I mean, I think it's great that was mentioned about LinkedIn, because there's so many, I'm going to say, people from all different professions, all different disciplines, that they're all giving their example or their experience of how they're doing it. There's a massive amount from the art world as well. So you're always, if you're looking for anything around that, there's always that. But I think one of the things that that I find, and somebody asked this question, what should they do? It is that real thing of, think of a task that you have to do, and rather than think to yourself, I'm just going to play with kind of prompt engineering, actually take every task that you've got in the next week and use one of the AI systems to do that. And actually, if you're not finding that you're getting the right thing, the next question to ask the AI is, what is the best prompt I can get you to enable you to give me the answer that I'm looking to get, or to produce the document that I want? And it will help you learn the language, because there is a really interesting thing about language. Some people say the best people who will survive, if I say, using prompt engineering is scientists and lawyers, because they have very precise language. And that's what you need to learn. You do need to learn that you're talking to a machine, and therefore you have to use language that's very different.
Anybody have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I can just add, one of the transitions that I'm seeing, it's from translators moving into more copywriters role, in the sense that AI is having a huge impact on marketing. Machine translator seems to be a good fit for this repetitive content, etc. But AI being more creative, I'm seeing a huge impact there. And I'm seeing how translators are using AI to create these or to add this copywriting skill that maybe they didn't have previously, and now they are adding that. So yeah, that's a huge transition going on there.
Yeah, I can speak to that. And again, I've been a big proponent of transitioning roles, and one of the first things that we've looked into is how we can look into content creation versus translation. I think that's very important, because in the world of copyright or and beyond, right? And I think AI has a huge benefit there for content creators overall. And if linguists are able to maximize that and utilize it to enhance and augment their own roles, it's a win-win. And I like the idea, again, of experimenting. And Arle, you shared that. Experimentation, and Alison, you touched on that, right? Experimentation, I think, is the best school in the world of AI right now. There's a lot of promising out there. People saying like, oh yeah, come here and learn this course. But next thing you know is like next week is going to be something different, because that's how fast and rapid things are moving. There's a lot of that, shiny object there that people are offering in terms of like the golden mine, that you can go and get all the, the source that you need and all the information that you need. But really, the reality is in the practice and the experimentation and observation of things and learning, and as Alison well puts, like learning how you can connect with the machine in a way that nobody, I think, can teach you, because it's so specific, right? So specific. There's no, I believe, there's no recipe that would apply to every industry out there. So you have to really think of those tasks and the roles that you have and the tasks you have at hand, and see how AI can benefit you and help AI help you, basically.
No, they're all good points, Patrick. And I think all you were referring to, you mentioned research, and how, when you were doing some research, for example, something that would have taken hours can now take minutes, or something that could take days can now take hours. And that efficiency gain is something that the companies are looking for, the C-suite's looking for, the customers are looking for. How does AI help me scale my business? How does AI increase the efficiency of my business? How does AI help me reduce costs in my business? But to your point, Patrick, as well, you have to learn to work with the various tools. And I want to put that to the panel, if I can, that the tools that we all know today in AI, which haven't been with us very long. I know AI and MT and everything has been with us for a while, but the tools that we're all using today, companies are now building their own GPTs. They're inputting their own corporate data, doing that at an enterprise level, keeping it quite private. They're feeding chatbots. And of course, all that has this knock-on effect, doesn't it, to the new way that we interface with corporate data, corporate information, how we translate and make that information then accessible to the world. That surely is this big change that you were talking about, Arle, in terms of the role of a translator today and the role of a translator tomorrow, and the different ways they're having to work on different types of content. Does anybody want to jump in on that?
Maybe I'll just toss one thing in here, which I didn't cover in the presentation, but been doing quite a bit with lately, is the role of terminology is going to become much, much more important. And I think because the way to constrain the large language models is with what's called knowledge graphs, which are closely related to terminological data. And that's going to tie in, as you talked about, people building their own large language models. All this means there's a need for knowledge control and formalization that previously wasn't really needed. And that's going to be a big opportunity for linguists going forward to make these things more useful by providing that control.
I also jump in with a slightly connected but slightly different element of that. I think that what I liked about what you were talking about earlier about the efficiency gains also was that I think one of the things around the efficiency gains and the simplicity of the tasks becoming because of the use of the AI is we actually could see some leveling of the playing field, because actually you might not have needed to go to a certain school, you might not have needed to get a certain set of qualifications to be able to get into some of these roles now, because actually the machines can help you do that. So actually you could see a wider group of people coming into the actual roles that you're talking about, whilst that could therefore impact as well, because you've not only got the AI, you've also got a wider group of people coming in. But I think that that's also a really helpful thing, that it could bring in more diversity into all of the professional disciplines that we're talking about. And that's one of the things that I believe that the AI does enable us to do.
Thank you, Alison. I'm going to throw in a couple of questions now if I can, because they're coming in thick and fast, and I know the clock is ticking, if that's okay. I've got a question from Chris. Hi, Arle. Your remarks are very insightful for bulk markets, which CSA obviously focuses and excels on. But do we miss the boat for premium markets where a massive overselling of past tech solutions has made demanding clients maybe a little more wary? Do you see any specific applications for AI at the premium end of the market, aside from research, where Chris says he uses it already? You know, I can earn a comfortable living and I'm not particularly greedy, but how can I use it to increase my share of the pie?
So Chris and I know each other well, and this is, you know, we've had a lot of discussion around this. Yeah. And she's right. I was focusing primarily on these sort of industrial applications of translation. What we need to see is there's a continuum from really sort of bulk, undifferentiated translation up to the premium side. And one way to conceive of that is around the risk. I think this is a useful lens. Premium translation is something where if it's not just right, you have a risk. So Chris works with financial translation. So if you're translating a financial filing and corporate report, that has to be absolutely right down to the comma. And there, the risk of using AI is quite high. So we'll see that's going to shift more towards the expert human, who then may use AI to do things. And she mentions research. I think that's primarily where the advantage will be. You know, being able to use content enrichment to find terms and other things and conduct that. I don't think we'll see the same acceleration there that we do with the MT-driven side of things. Although if quality estimation gets to be good enough, it could still help supply MT feedstock for boilerplate language or other things. But yeah, she's right. The bulk market is going to be more resistant, and there I'd focus primarily on using AI for research and non-translation related tasks?
Okay, important distinction. Thank you all. A challenge, this is from Caro, sorry, a challenge I'm seeing in the current AI enhanced world is the proliferation of various tools and systems, i.e. website, browse and search systems, all promoting their AI and smart capabilities. Of course they are. But is there a risk of non-English speaking world falling even more behind? That's a great question. In the access to the functionality of such tools, or do the panel feel that that languages outside of the US and maybe some of those European stats you are sharing with us, will we catch up? Have we seen any actual developments to address this imbalance? I know, Alison, you were saying maybe there's more we can do by sharing those stats, but I think it's a great question.
I think it is a really great question, and I think again, even if you just watch LinkedIn or YouTube, there is also so much there about how there is more adoption of some of this technology in non-English speaking countries or as the primary language, because they see it as ways that they can enhance and grow themselves, and they're much more readily looking to kind of gobble up all of the new knowledge. So I think, yes, there are all of these different tools, but actually when it comes to those tools, I think people in different countries, especially non-English speaking countries, are finding ways to use them. And I think they're going to outstrip, I think, unless particularly, I'm going to say the UK kind of increases its focus in this quite rapidly, we could see ourselves overtaken in people's use of the technologies.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Alison, because we've seen, again, in the world of experimentation, which we've been doing a lot in our team over here, we've been very surprised, because even like when Arle shared some of the stats in terms of the languages and the shares of the pie, we've been getting feedback from our team that like Asian language such as Japanese are getting very accurate and very culturally appropriate, which we did not expect, because generally those Asian languages, right, if you look at the word of machine translation, NMT and all that, generally there is a difference, but we've been very surprised, and that just shows that people are using it more and more, because that's how AI survives, right? It's from human to machine and vice versa. So we're getting very, very interesting feedback in terms of how other parts of the world are using it, and it's showing through the output we're getting through AI.
Thank you. Just a quick correction on my part. Emma is actually logged in as Caro. I said Caro. That's how it shows up, but it's actually Emma. So thank you for your question, Emma. And one more thing from Emma, if I can, is she said that very curious about the use of Gen AI for content creation. That's come up as part of your discussion. Isn't it all based on the content that already exists out there? We saw GPT moving from, I think we were stuck in 2021. I think we're now stuck in April 2023. But you can search the internet and the web, currently with various plugins or whatever. So the question is, does it really actually create anything fresh or new or genuinely new or unique? So where do we end up in 5 years' time when everybody now uses this tool to, inverted commas, create content? And I suppose maybe if I can add to your question, if you don't mind, Emma, when the AI outputs start feeding the AI data inputs and training the machines, where does that all lead to? It's a great question.
I may jump in.
Oh,
yeah, I think the question is is anything out there original anymore, right? I think that's a basic question, philosophical question, because one can ask, right? It's what is really original out there these days? Of course, there can be plenty of things, and I think that's a very interesting question. I think that's where a lot of the roles will evolve, right? That's why you think of some things beyond, what you get in terms of copyright infringement, fact checking. Is it really accurate? Is it? So there are many things that are packaged within this idea. And Alison, I think, also mentioned the bias, right, and the ethical things. I think that's a role that's going to definitely, probably, I can see that emerge in terms of ethical and bias specialists that can help curate and can look at that content and apply what needs to be applied from copyright perspective to ethical and bias. So I think it's a philosophical question that I think exists out there. What is original anymore? I would pose that question and think about it and see how we can be part of that, knowing that, again, at the end of the day, there's no turning back, right? It's only going to keep going from here. So I think it's a very interesting philosophical question. And I think we might not have the true answer for it because we don't know what we don't know.
Thank you, Patrick. Alison,
isn't there always what's new to me might not be new to you? And actually, therefore, there is always things new, yeah? So how you might have used something for years, given your experience, I might come on and say, oh, I've learned this. And you're like, yeah, we've been doing that for years. But I might learn it and use it in a different way. So I think it's about thought, isn't it? So then you might say, well, who's the thinking? Well, I think the inputting of the human idea to create a question or to create this existential thinking really enables us to come up with new things. So I think there is going to be, I'm more on the optimist. There's always new things happening, and everyone will look at it from a different lens all the time.
Thank you, Alison.
Maybe I'll toss in, I did some calculations just a couple of days ago. And when you look at the training data that's out there for these models, just with the growth of content, it's always about half of the training data will be from within the last year. So, and that's going to be going forward because of this exponential function in growth. And that's going to create a challenge for the developers because so much of this growth now is going to be driven, as you pointed out, Simon, by AI generated content. And it's going to start swamping out the stuff that isn't, the older content that isn't generated by generative AI. What the effect is going to be, we don't know yet, but they call this AI autophagy. That's the term that's used. It's AI eating itself. And there are risks with it reinforcing biases and other things that need to be addressed. And it's going to make it critical that these companies address this and also that they work with humans more to create content that isn't just pulled out of the same ever polluting, maybe content cesspool is what we'll end up with.
It's a great point. I love the AI eating itself. That's the name of a podcast or an album coming soon, that's for sure.
I'm definitely using that word rather than the more complicated word he said.
I couldn't even pronounce it. The thing that you said as well, Alison, stuck with me as well. I think that's a very valid point. And it reminded me of music, the world of music. We all can learn chords, but how you string them together makes very different music, doesn't it? And I think that's maybe an analogy we could look at. There's always a new song, there's always a new tune. It's the same set of chords behind the scenes. But your point, as we don't know what we don't know at this stage, I think is kind of where we're at, right? Another question, if I can, I know we're up against the clock here. I want to try and answer as many of our questions as I can here. Question from Andy. How can the future and older generations of translators and interpreters be trained to use AI responsibly? Being mindful of the things you were saying a moment ago, Patrick: copyright infringement, confidentiality, ethical issues, corporate confidential data, those kind of areas. How do we train people, future and maybe people that have been in this industry for a while, on the responsible use of AI?
Can I jump in with a few thoughts on that?
As a director of ethics, I think you have to.
Because I think this is so fundamental, really, whichever country you are in. This is about strategists and policymakers really saying, we have future generations. And I know this question is the future and the old, and that is true. But we have school systems and education and university systems that are still keeping it at bay, are still nervous about it, are still not integrating it. And this is where, we teach children chemistry so that they do chemistry in the correct ways, yeah? And so actually it's the same. We need to teach everything about AI so that it's not secret. It's the same about children's safety. When you don't talk about something in school or environments, people don't bring up the issues. If we want the next generations, Gen A, to be really safe with this and understand it, we need to teach them what to be ethical about it means. The same as we teach them what to be ethical about mixing different chemicals to make different ingredients. Yeah, this is how we have to approach it. And it absolutely is the responsibility of the states to be saying, this is how we need to do that. And then I think with older, it's employers' responsibility. And I'm not passing the buck from individuals. We all have an individual to learn, but employers need to be saying, where are we going in the world? And how do we do core training? We all do core training and we all have compulsory training in employment. We need that to be in there.
Yeah, define the sandbox, right? Define the sandbox we can play in and let us play within the sandbox. So I think a lot of the the immediate reaction is to like, oh, no, we don't want to go down that path, shut it down, that's not good. But you have to think about the benefits of it. So defining it, and I think it's putting a lot of pressure on those who are involved in those conversations from a legal perspective, a risk management perspective, and we all have to do the work. Give us a sandbox, and we can all play safely and be happy about it.
One challenge in this right now is the legal frameworks are necessarily very conservative, and they aren't near to catching up with what's going on. And then some of the regulatory things that are being proposed by people who don't understand the technology. So this is going to be a bit of a hot mess for, I think, several years.
Very good. I like that. The last question, and then we'll have a quick closing thought from each member of our panel, if that's okay. Last question. It's on the same topic of ethics, but we're talking about enabling people and companies to scale up. But how are we working, and how could we even use AI itself to improve life quality for people? So maybe you don't have to work so much, so long, so hard. Even as we expand the scope of translation, creation in other locales for additional content, how do we make life more chill for people? Not saying it's for us to answer here, but maybe we need to think beyond just making the company more profitable. That's a very interesting sort of question, isn't it? How does it improve the human quality of life, I think, is what we're talking about here.
And I wish I could remember the name of the research. There was research, was it this week or last week, that came out that said one of the things that AI will help create is the 4-day working week. Somebody might have seen that too, that actually people will be able to work less. I mean, it could be because of what you talked earlier, efficiencies, but it could also be that there are different tasks to be done. But with that also comes the issue of, if people work less, will they be paid less? And therefore, whilst they have more time, does their quality of life improve because they might have less money to be able to do the things that they wanted to do?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alison. Thank you to everybody who's asked us questions. We haven't got to everything, and I do apologize for that. We'll try and get back to everybody after the event if you've asked the questions that we haven't been able to raise here live. I want to go around and get some closing thoughts. Maybe Julio, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, back to one of the last comments that you guys share. It's, we don't know what we don't know. But one thing I can share is actually, and it happened to me when I just joined the company. In my first conversation with the CTO, his first question was, what are we doing around AI in localization? That was his first question. So it's clear that this is the way forward. This is where things are moving on. And though obviously we have a responsibility to create a better environment, and when we were talking about ethics, making sure that also minority language are also part of the explosion of the AI localization efforts. One of the things that I'm also seeing is that it's just not about the translation per se or the localization per se. It's also how we operate internally. We are seeing a lot of AI functionalities in TMSs that are helping us do our work better, like what's the best translator, what's the best fit for this content based on the profile. So it's just not about translation per se, it's just about how we operate internally. And this is, exponentially improving the way we are doing things. So my word to the professional translators out there is just that their world is not changing, it's changing all our world, and we are here to adapt and use AI to make better version of ourselves. And again, don't see AI as the enemy, but as a powerful tool that we can use.
Thank you very much. Alison, closing remarks?
Yes, I'm going to say education, 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 the most important things. And most importantly, other than that, don't believe what you read on the AI. Always read and explore it. Yeah, I learned the word hallucinations before. I used to think it was just lying, but it is around making sure that you do that. Yeah, so educate yourself and always say that you are a part of that discussion. There are two people in it.
Thank you. Patrick, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's, I think at the end of the day, it really is about being human-centric no matter what, right? Because it is about improving qualities of lives and whatnot. So it's about human-centric. So from the concept of how we can make lives better for everybody involved, and about acquiring complementary skills, embracing the opportunities that are there, keeping the human as the center focus of this is important at the end of the day. So I think it's all about taking on those opportunities, but keeping human-centric as the focus.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And Arle, I'm going to leave the last comment to you.
Oh, I'd reiterate something that Alison said, is I think learn to be skeptical about things in the positive sense that you ask, is this really true? How can I use this? Be a critical consumer of information. There's a whole lot of just absolute nonsense being published about AI right now. So learn to see through that and find where it's really useful, and you'll be set to benefit from it. It's going to be a net positive, but it's going to take some time to work through things.
Well, look, that brings us nicely to the end of this roundtable discussion. We were never going to cover all areas. I know there's lots of conversations and chat and questions we haven't got to, but I do want to thank everybody who's joined us here live today. And also thank you if you're watching this on a replay. Thank you to all our guests, Alison, Patrick, Julio, and Arle, for a wonderful presentation at the top. Certainly appreciate your time. Thanks very much for joining us at the Think Global Forum Roundtable discussion. Thank you, everybody.